and welcome to DIY History. My name is Cassidy Cash. This is the channel where I share with you snippets from my podcast called That Shakespeare Life every Monday. And then here on Saturdays, we explore games, recipes, and crafts from the life of William Shakespeare. So if you like Tudor history, Stuart history, that's the one with King James, or of course, Shakespeare, then hit that like and subscribe button because we're here every Saturday. Fall is coming up fast and furious here, which I am so excited about. September is right around the corner, and then October, which means one of the cutest little parts of fall will be here soon, and that is the acorn. Today, we're going to explore whether or not Shakespeare would have had acorns and eaten acorns, and how might he have had them in recipes. We will look at all of these questions, including recipes from Shakespeare's England that you can try yourself at home. That's what's here this week on DIY History. A staple of a foraging lifestyle, acorns are considered a forest food. And in the 11th century, which is well before Shakespeare, there was actually a royal forest called New Forest, where pigs were set out to eat the acorns that fell there in this forest full of oak trees. This forest is still in England, and pigs are set out there every fall to eat the acorns. For centuries in Europe, they were used as an emergency food during times of famine or hardship when food was hard to get. Roman philosopher Pliny the Elder wrote about how acorns can be used to make bread, but he stresses that it's only if you're really hungry and can't find anything else. Acorns are rich in a lot of nutrients that are great for our bodies, like protein, carbohydrates, fat, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, and niacin, and they're actually quite good for you. But the catch is that they generally taste very bad, and that's because acorns have a lot of what's called tannins, so they're very, very bitter to taste. Also, too many tannins can actually poison you. So the trick to working with acorns is to cook them first. That's why most ancient recipes call for the acorns to be soaked in either salt water or meat broth, and you do this repeatedly before using them in a recipe. Now, the acorn and specifically oak trees are really embedded in the history of England. You may have even heard people praise the English oak, as if you've watched Robin Hood with Kevin Costner, you know.
Damned English oak.
They curse the English oak because the door can't be broken down. Anyway, go watch the movie. But the English oak is a very patriotic part of England itself. And if you look into the history of oak trees in England, it takes you down an entirely other rabbit trail that we'll have to chase on DIY History in another episode. But I wanted to mention that in the reign of Henry VIII, England passed a law to protect oak trees in England. And by the middle of Shakespeare's lifetime, so this is right around the end of the 16th century, planting oak trees in England was very popular. So there were a lot of acorns to work with during Shakespeare's lifetime. Additionally, if you look at the oldest oak tree in England, it is actually said to be Bowthorpe Oak. That is near Lincolnshire, England, and it is estimated to be over 1,000 years old, and it is over 40 feet across its circumference all the way around. Now, we know acorns were a part of Shakespeare's lifetime because he does mention them in his plays. There are five references to acorns in Shakespeare's plays. And As You Like It, Celia says, I found him under a tree like a dropped acorn. And there are 4 additional references, one in Cymbeline, one in The Tempest, and 2 more in Midsummer Night's Dream. Now, as far as whether or not Shakespeare ate acorns, none of the quotes from his plays refer to eating them. So I don't know for certain whether Shakespeare ate them, and indeed, finding a reference to eating them in his plays wouldn't be proof that he ate them anyway. But nevertheless, I can go back and look at the life of William Shakespeare and the years between 1564 and 1616 to find out that people during that time period did in fact eat acorn. One example of this comes from Bartolomeo Scappi. Now, he is an Italian cook, but his recipe book was hugely influential around Europe. He lived from 1500 to 1577, so he died when Shakespeare was a teenager. Now, he was Italian, and if you've been following along on the channel, you've probably seen Bartolomeo Scappi get mentioned in previous episodes because he was kind of a big deal for Tudor cookery and food history from this period because his cookbooks survive and give us a glimpse into what eating was like in the past. Acorns are one such food that he mentions, and he helps us understand them in his book I'm going to butcher this Italian, but I'm going to give it a go anyway. Opera dell'arte de cucinare. Cucinare, I really don't know if they pronounce it cucinare or cucinare, but whatever. It was published in Venice in 1570, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes so you can practice your Italian. But in it, Bartolomeo Scappi writes about how to make an acorn torta, or an acorn pie. Looking back into antiquity, we can find that while oak bark was more common as a medicine than the actual acorn, the acorn too had some medicinal applications. Pliny the Elder, again, the Roman philosopher we mentioned earlier, he talks about using the acorn on the skin as a type of astringent. It could also be used as a treatment for stomach pain. Acorns are used in a concoction to prevent vomiting, and they can be used to treat inflammation. Acorn powder was used as a diuretic, and I was able to find at least one reference to a mixture of acorns, milk, and oak bark that was used to counteract poison. So from English patriotism to finding it in your medicine cabinet, what are you going to do with acorns when you want to cook them? Well, I went looking for recipes with acorns, and I found everything from coffee to cakes and even alcohol and vodka that you can make from acorns. And I have so much more respect for my oak trees now. Like, I didn't realize these were so useful. From Shakespeare's lifetime and a little bit before, there's one recipe from Hyatt and Butler's called An Ordinance of Pottage in the 15th Century. Now, this is before Shakespeare by about 100 years, but it gives a recipe for acorn pottage. That book doesn't actually give too many details about how to cook it, but it does tell that acorns were traditionally food for the poverty-stricken, and that the great portion of sugar you would need to make acorn pottage and other expensive ingredients in that recipe would be beyond the reach of a poverty-stricken person anyway. So he's kind of like apologizing for including it in the recipe book. It's funny, you should take a look. I've also read that if you don't soak the acorns correctly, they can actually be poisonous. So if you're going to cook this at home, and I think you should, but I think you should also do it safely. So here's a couple of places that I suggest you begin. Andrea Marisacci is a lecturer in medieval history at Università degli Studi di Bari. Again, I don't speak Italian, but it was a great opportunity to emit great flourish, don't you think? He has taught courses on food history in the Middle Ages and anthropology of food. He's published on many aspects connected with food in medieval times, and he wrote one really helpful article I used for today's episode for the medieval times. And there are two key things that he has to say about cooking with acorns. Firstly, he points out that in 1549, the steward of the House of Este posthumously published a cookbook where we find a recipe for acorn pie. That's the same type of acorn pie that Bartolomeo Scappi was mentioning in the 1570s. Now, this House of Este steward suggests taking the acorns and boiling them in broth and then passing them through a filter. There was no specification on what kind of filter you're supposed to use here. Is it like a sieve? Is it like cheesecloth? What are we talking here? It did not explain. But this process, the boiling, is the removing of the tannins part that I told you about earlier. After you get all the tannins out and you have filtered your acorns, the cook adds grated cheese, sugar, cinnamon, pepper, butter, and eggs. Basically mix it all together, cook it in a container in the oven, and sprinkle with sugar. Dr. Marisacci goes on to explain that the basic idea of cooking with acorns was to start by removing the tannins. So no matter what you're cooking, that's step one. This is parboiling it in the meat broth or the salt water that we see in the earlier 1549 recipe. Then you're going to ground up the acorns. Presumably, you take them out of their shell here, but again, the recipe doesn't say. You use a mortar and then you pass them through a filter. Again, no explanation about the filter. Nevertheless, after you filter them, again, you're mixing it with cheese and sugar and spices and egg yolks, and then cooking it into a pie. So like many of the Tudor England recipes that I found, it's basically a custard with nuts in it. So fancy. Now, if you want to try them out for yourself, what I've done is gone through and collected a whole list of modernized recipe links for easy to do acorn recipes like acorn pancakes or acorn cakes or even this acorn pie. But it has links to precise instructions for what you can do to get the tannins out of the acorns, how to shell them, and then how to grind them up, and exactly what size filter you need to do that process. I've put all of these links together in the show notes for today's episode, so make sure you go there to check that out. It has everything you need to celebrate Shakespeare and fall by cooking your own set of acorns. Use that list to create this fun staple. And join me back here next week for the next episode of DIY History. That's it for this week. I'm Cassidy Cash. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this helps you enjoy fall and Shakespeare and acorns, which are so adorable despite all of their tannins. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.